So moving forward, I'm going to be talking about variables and cursor within MySQL. So let's first talk about what a variable is. Then I'm going to demonstrate, of course, how to create a variable. And likewise, moving forward, we'll talk about cursors as well. So variables can be user-defined or, for example, session variables, right? So they're declared using the set or select into statement, and they can store single values. So let's dive right in. Once you see it, it'll make more sense. So I'm going to go ahead and simply go ahead and declare a variable. So first I'm going to place a comment, which I did. So next I'm going to use the set statement. So it'll be set at, which is the at sign, and then of course the total courses. That's the variable I want to be using. And I'm going to put a value to this as 0. Okay. So this is where I would set or declare a variable. Okay. Next, I'm going to go ahead and assign the number of courses to this particular variable. So it's going to store that particular value. So let me go ahead and put another comment in here. Great. So it's just a comment. And next, I'm going to go ahead and use the select count statement, right? So I'm going to count the total number of courses and that are going to be stored in that variable that I've specified or declared above. So let's go ahead and do a simple select count. And I've done this before, so you should be pretty comfortable with working with the functions, right? So I'm going to select the count, the total number of courses into, and then I'm going to specify the variable. Okay, so that's where it's going to go ahead and display all, or rather store, and then later on display, of course, all the courses. So here are a simple select count everything into the variable from the courses table. And of course, finally, I'm just going to go ahead and do a display. Now, in order to do the display, the values of the variable, I'm just going to go ahead and run a simple select statement. So I'm going to go ahead and say select total courses, which is the name of the variable itself, as the total courses count. And this could be, of course, the alias, right? So this could be, but you could use count, you could use any other name that you prefer. So that's really how you declare a variable, right? So let's run through this code. Simply declare a variable, set at total courses, and then assign the number of courses to the variable, and then finally display the variable value. So let's execute this code, and notice, there we go. So there are a total of 5 courses that are being displayed. So notice the value comes from the variable, right? So this variable has stored this particular value in itself. Kind of makes sense, right? So likewise, they're very powerful. You can use variables within MySQL 8 as per your own logic. Okay. Next, let's take a look at cursors and what those are and how do we actually use them, which is basically a cursor in MySQL is also a database object, right? And it retrieves and manipulates a result row by row. So we know that SQL is a transactional programming language as opposed to Java or C#, right? Which are iterative in nature. So cursors are basically a special control structure that enables or traversal over the records in the database in order to process, for example, rows of a query result set for sequential processing, right? So for example, we've been working with stored procedures, but here a cursor makes it possible to perform complex logic on a row by row basis, like I mentioned earlier. Now, you need to understand there are 3 basic properties of the cursor. There's a sensitive, there's read-only, and there's non-scrollable. Okay, so the sensitive is where the server may or may not make a copy of the results table. Read-only, where the data may not be updated. And of course, non-scrollable, it can only be traversed only in one direction, and of course cannot skip rows. And the way we use cursors, I'm going to demonstrate this as well, is you simply declare a cursor, you open the cursor, it's going to fetch the data into variables and then close when it's done. That's it. It's a 4-step process. That's how you would actually use a cursor. So let's go ahead, dive right in, and let me demonstrate how to use a cursor in MySQL 8. So let me go ahead and clear the result grid right here. So let's close this. Let's get rid of all of this. Perfect. All right, so we start the cursor by the delimiter, okay? And this is a special type basically that we use in MySQL 8. Okay, and I think I've used this before, so let me go ahead and make sure I correct the spelling. Great. And next we simply create the procedure first, and here I'm going to go ahead and simply do create procedure, and then of course the name of the procedure itself. So I'm going to call it process, for example, students, and then do the begin. Okay, and then once I've done this, of course I'm going to declare some variables. So here this is going to be student first name. Next I'm going to declare the student's last name, and also declare, for example, the integer as well. So what's happening here is basically just a simple example that's going to loop through the university students table and then prints the first name and last name of each student. That's all we're basically doing here. Okay, so I'm just going to place a comment here. So next I'm going to go ahead and do the declare student cursor and simply run a select statement. And this select statement is simply going to be, it's going to select the first name, last name from the university students table. Next, I'm going to put another comment, and this time I'm going to declare a handler to manage the end of the cursor. And here I'm going to go ahead and declare, for example, a continue handler if not found. This is going to set the value set done to equals to 1. So once I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and then of course write a comment, open the cursor, because remember the 4-step process, right? So this is part of that. So let's go ahead and then open the cursor, which is student underscore cursor. So once I open this, next I'm going to loop through each row. So here's the comment, so it's easier once you're actually going through the code itself, right? So let's go ahead and do student loop. And I'm just going to do a while, and then it's going to go ahead and fetch student cursor into the student first name and then student last name. Great. So once it loops through it, it's going to check next. It's going to check if there are no more rows, right? And that's important too as part of running our logic. And the way it's going to check it is, of course, do an if statement, right? So if done equals 1, then it's going to leave the student loop or just do the end if, simple if statement. And this is going to output next the student's first name and last name. So let's do a select statement. In the select statement, I'm going to use concatenation, right? So it's going to club both the student first name and last name together as one. And that's what we mean by when we use the word concat. So it's short for concatenation. Great. So all I did was simply execute or write the select concatenation, where it's going to combine the student first name and last name and display as one, right? Which is going to be the student name itself, which will include the first name and last name. So once the select statement is done, next I'm going to go ahead and simply do the end while to close the loop. And finally close the cursor and end the delimiter. Well, let's make sure we have the comment here. This simply closes the cursor. So it's not a statement. And then I'm going to do I'm missing this last part, right? So finally do close the student cursor. Perfect. There we go. All right, let's see, scroll up here. Oh, there we go. So let's do a student loop here. Of course, I need the colon. See if any other errors exist. All right, great. So our code seems pretty okay. Let's execute this and see the results for ourselves, because what we've done here, we're simply created a procedure called process students, and we declared some variables as part of the 4-step process in creating a cursor. Then we declared the cursor to retrieve the first and last name of students. And then of course the handler, just to make sure that it runs correctly, opens the cursor, do a loop, and then check if there are no more rows, and then of course output the actual names of the students. And I'm using concatenation, so it displays as one itself. So let's execute this code, and there we go. If I refresh the schema, we should have a process students procedure. Perfect. So let's execute this procedure, and to do that, we know that how to do that, right? So it's call process students, and once I execute this, you'll notice, perfect. So it now gives us row by row details of each of the students. So, and remember the concatenation, right? So I'm actually seeing John Cena as one name. And similarly, in all these result sets, different result sets, I'm going to see each result being displayed individually. Okay, so we have Jane Smith, for example, we have Alice Johnson, and so on, Bob Brown, and so on. So now you have a stored procedure which actually uses the cursor. So I hope this helps practice with variables and cursors. Okay, let me know if you have any questions with this. Let's move to the next lesson.